Hello, so today we'll be looking at exploring underwater photogrammetry by myself, Vahbiz, and Sam. So just a quick overview of what underwater photogrammetry is. So over two-thirds of the Earth's surface is covered in the ocean. Due to recent technological advances over the past decade, we are now able to access areas of the ocean that were previously thought to be completely out of reach. Underwater photogrammetry allows for the exploration of areas that we are not able to go and see for ourselves. There are several types of underwater photogrammetry, ranging from satellite to aerial to close range. In this presentation in particular, we will be looking at close range underwater photogrammetry. So just a quick overview. We'll start with looking at the challenges of underwater photogrammetry, and then we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages, and some of the applications. Sam will talk about the equipment, techniques, and other intricacies involved. And he'll also go over the case study for underwater archaeology, and I will talk about how close range underwater photogrammetry is used in marine habitats. So the challenges of underwater photogrammetry. The biggest change, obviously, from conventional photogrammetry on land to underwater would be the medium. So water works very, very different from air. It distorts light differently, and it's a much denser medium. So water causes light rays to scatter, and it carries blue and green light very, very well. So this makes images appear to have sort of a bluish green kind of filter over them. In addition to this, because it's much denser, water prevents light rays from traveling long distance effectively or clearly. So it causes a bit of a hazy effect on images or components further back in the image, far away in the background. This is known as backscatter. So as you can see in the two images, before any correctional software is applied, the original data collected has a very, very strong blue-green haze. And this forces many researchers and scientists to have to physically go to the site anyways to gather the information that they need. And it limits the observable areas as people have to be able to go there, carry the equipment, oxygen, and having to find the people with the expertise to handle the equipment and conduct surveys effectively. In addition, many of the techniques that we use on land don't always work underwater. For example, interval image capturing. So how it works is a camera is set up to take a photo after every given time interval, and it will travel a particular path and follow it back. In underwater photogrammetry, the current speed has a huge effect on how these images are taken. So when you're moving with the current, the camera is moving faster, and there's more distance covered between each image being captured. And on the way back, moving against the current, the distance traveled is significantly less, leading the images to be taken close together. It makes it very difficult to have an accurate survey. In addition, calibrating the equipment for underwater conditions is a very tedious process. Many factors like the lighting, current speed, tidal height, and temperature all affect the distortions in the image taken. And depending on the depth of the network, the equipment has to be able to sustain its accuracy under the ocean pressure. Some advantages and disadvantages of close-range underwater photogrammetry. So when coupled with post-processing correction, close-range underwater photogrammetry can allow for accurate imaging of the seafloor, terrain, and wildlife. It can be used to remotely track changes in the seafloor. It can reduce the need for manual labor or physical presence at a site to acquire imaging. And additional data can always be computed using the same images should it be required in the future. Some of the disadvantages, depending on the accuracy needed, equipment can be expensive and often requires expertise and familiarity to operate and collect data accurately. Calibrating equipment takes time and often has to be done in more than one setup. And any surveys underwater encompass additional errors. And this is again mainly because Most of the equipment is designed for use in air, so the attenuation of light through the housing port and the water media, and errors in the assumption of light path due to refraction in the water. Some applications of underwater photogrammetry. So this technique is useful in several different industries, including archaeology, which we'll talk about, observing shipwrecks or any accidents at sea, marine habitats, which we will also touch on, and deep sea exploration on a more local scale, understanding riverbed surfaces, and many, many more.
For the methodology of underwater close-range photogrammetry, we'll be focusing on when the camera and object are both submerged underwater. For a camera to be used underwater, it must be housed in a waterproof casing. The distance between the camera, lens, and the casing is fixed for all images. To account for the refraction of the ray as it passes through different mediums, air, glass to water, or water, glass to air, a modified collinearity model must be defined. Once that model is defined and the data is collected, a bundle adjustment can be performed using the same equations as shown in class for close-range bundle adjustment. Collinearity equations are adequate for imagery in one medium, like air. However, in a multimedia environment where the image goes through multiple mediums, from air to water or water to air, the collinearity must be maintained through an adapted model. This adapted model follows the geometric relation, which can be seen here on the right. In this geometric relation, lowercase f is the focal length, uppercase f is the distance from the perspective center to the protective casing, lowercase r is the radial distance of the image point from the principal point, uppercase r is the distance from the optical axis on the casing surface to the incident point of the ray. Delta capital F is the perspective center offset. This is where the ray would have landed if not refracted. Alpha is the angle of refraction, and beta is the angle of incidence. Using Snell's law of refraction, alpha and beta can be related using this equation shown below. The angular quantities can then be expressed by these three relations. From Snell's law and using the relationships above, R can be modeled as this. The perspective center offset can now be written as a constant shown on the bottom left, or as a product of the angle of refraction shown on the bottom right. If we start with the standard equation for collinearity, where lowercase f is the camera focal length, p is the object space coordinates, c is the perspective center, and lowercase r are the row vectors of the rotation matrix, we get this equation. Using the perspective center distance plus the perspective center offset as the new focal length, the equation becomes this, where delta c is the modified perspective center, and x prime, y prime, and f prime are the modified image coordinates. Since the third row of the rotation matrix characterizes the optical axis in the object space, the modified collinearity equations can be written as this, where delta c is written as the third row of the rotation matrix times the perspective center offset. Using this and the modified image coordinates, this collinearity equation can finally be written as this, shown on the bottom right. Different protective casings of the camera comes in various thicknesses. The image on the right shows the ray as it proceeds from water to glass to air. In the initial model, capital F was the distance from the perspective center to the air-water interface. In this model, the air-water interface needs to be shifted by d, which is a product of the glass thickness t. The figure on the right shows the difference in the exact and approximate corrections to the perspective center offset evaluated at the angle of refraction, with a casing thickness of 2 millimeters and 4 millimeters. Up to 35 degrees, the air for a thickness of 2 millimeters is negative 0.1 millimeters. For a thickness of 4 millimeters, it is negative 0.2 millimeters. Given the size of the perspective center distance, for most cases, this air due to the thickness is negligible. The general methods for acquiring data for underwater close-range photogrammetry are nearly the same as the methods for acquiring data for terrestrial close-range photogrammetry. The first order design and zero order design must be taken into account. For the zero order design, the data needs to be minimally constrained using fixed or weighted GCPs. GCPs can be established underwater by numerous methods, similar to terrestrial, just wearing scuba equipment. A spatial observation can be used to constrain the datum scale. For the first order design, the more images, the better for the object point precision. A larger standoff distance yields a better image point precision, and a convergence angle of 90 to 106 degrees is ideal for acquiring images. For a multiple image acquired network, like a drone has a flight plan, a swimmer must have a swim plan. So shown here, we have the locking path, which runs along the outside of the area of interest, and then goes into the traversal path, going up and down over the area of interest. We then end going up to the longitudinal path, which is left to right, right to left. And then finally, we end up in the auxiliary path, where we go over specific objects of interest. For equipment, any camera can be used, depending on the user's quality preference. Camera needs to be encased in a waterproof housing. High quality underwater scuba rated light sources are needed, and wide angle lenses are preferred. Scuba gear or an extremely good ability to hold your breath is also required. Now we'll get into two case studies which utilize underwater close range photogrammetry. The first case study is an underwater archaeological site recording in Drumbeg, Sutherland. In August 2012, divers took to the waters in Drumbeg on the northwest coast of Scotland. The purpose of this dive was to investigate cannons noticed by a local scallop diver. The initial dive identified 3 cannons on the seabed, approximately 13 to 16 meters below the water's surface, laying next to a section of preserved hull. It was necessary to remove a light covering of seaweed to prepare the cannons for a photogrammetry survey. To reduce changes in color and lighting, all images of the features were observed at the same vertical distance. All images were captured as close to the seabed as possible without disturbing the seabed. Initially, images were shot in an oval pattern around and level with each cannon to get the side views and overhangs. Then a collection of vertical images 2 meters above the seafloor were captured. The resulting dataset was then processed using Photoscan. The models of the cannons was then exported from Photoscan to GNU Image Manipulation Program. In GNU, the model's textures and colors were corrected. Finally, the mesh lab was used to produce orthographic plan views of the model. The locations of the features were observed using a USBL diver tracking system. Using the model and location data, ArcGIS was then used to register the information to the British National Grid. This image on the right is the model of the 3 cannons. This model was created using 35 million vertices. On the right is another model of the cannons with enhanced surface detail. This enhanced surface details allows us to see little things, like the chisel marks shown on Cannon 3. No precise control set was available for this survey. Comparisons had to be made using diver tape measurements and 3D models. This image on the right shows a diver making these tape measurements at the site. The average error for the measurements was approximately 3%. For the longest measurement, muzzle to breach, the error was less than 1%, so less than 1 centimeter. It seems as though the longer the measurement, the more accurate it was.
So when looking at marine habitats, coral reefs are a fundamental part for sustaining underwater life. So we'll be taking a look at the IDEA project, which looked at sections of marine coral reefs, and we'll be looking at how they used close-range photogrammetry to help collect accurate data. In general, underwater photogrammetry is becoming increasingly important in research of marine biology. It's a non-destructive and low-cost method for ocean exploration and analysis, and it can produce spatially detailed and accurate measurements of benthic communities. So the Maria IDEA project worked to digitize an entire island ecosystem, including the underwater habitat around it. The IDEA project worked with the Maria Coral Reef Long-Term Ecological Research, or MCR-LTER program, and data used the data previously gathered was used as a base model to better understand the coral structures in the area. One of the main objectives as well was to provide long-term observations for the coral reefs. So several permanent sampling stations were established around Maria in 3 primary coral reef habitats. So the orange circles indicate 4 reefs and the yellow indicate fringing reefs. Primary and secondary control networks were established around the reefs to help ensure tracking and variations in measurements year by year. So each plot was equipped with a permanent network of reference points, providing a detailed data for the photogrammetric models. It was broken down into 2 networks, as can be seen in the images. So the red PRPs are part of the primary network. These points were measured through conventional geodetic techniques, so trilateration and leveling, and it was used to define a baseline epoch. The secondary network in blue is estimated from the baseline epoch and is used to transform photogrammetric models to the reference system. The geodetic network was performed following minimal constraint and free network solutions. So the minimal constraint was computed, free network solution was computed, and a model to tie the 2 together was also computed. The following image details the network captured for one of the most challenging 4 reef plots. It encompasses a 50-meter by a 10-meter area. And in this image, you can see the area scales similar to the ones that we looked at throughout the year. So this image details the imaging path that was followed. This, I believe, is a 5 by 5 meter area, but similar paths were followed for the larger coral reef plots as well. Here we can see the accuracy and details of the primary network setups at various coral reefs. So they used a couple different camera systems, and for every camera but the M300, they tested it at 2 heights, so at 2 and 5 meters. The DSD is the ground sample distance. As you can see, at the 2-meter level, there are many, many more images taken, and at the 5-meter level, there were less images taken, but the mean intersection angles are presented. The image over here shows how the image distortion, the color distortions mentioned earlier affect the data gathered. So color palettes are placed throughout the network. So when images are captured, color corrections can be made using post-processing software. That is all for our presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed and learned something new. Thank you.